even as that election interference investigation, that potentially criminal investigation into Donald Trump and his allies moves forward in Georgia, there's also new developments now in the New York state investigation into the former president's business. It was 2 months ago when the business run by former President Trump and his family got criminally indicted. New York prosecutors indicted the Trump Organization itself and its longtime CFO, Allen Weisselberg, charged them with a years-long, multi-million-dollar tax fraud scheme. Mr. Weisselberg himself and lawyers for the Trump Organization have pled not guilty in that case. The case is ongoing. But since those initial indictments, lots of breath has been expended, lots of ink has been spilled as to whether that was the extent of the case, whether there would be superseding indictments with more charges for those defendants, whether there would be other defendants indicted on other charges, either related to the initial alleged tax scheme or related to something else. Well, now we know, or at least we know that it's still going. The prosecutors who brought those charges against the Trump Organization and its CFO, they have been continuing to work that case, and they apparently have more to give. The Wall Street Journal was first to report that the special grand jury that's been hearing evidence in the Trump case, the grand jury that handed down the previous criminal indictments, last week they decided they needed to hear from yet more witnesses. Even before the first indictments, the Wall Street Journal and also CNN had reported that somebody else from the Trump Organization, a guy with a name you won't forget, they had reported that he was under scrutiny by prosecutors, that he'd been advised to get his own attorney, that prosecutors were potentially seeking his cooperation. I said you will not forget his name. You will not forget his name. His name is Matthew Calamari, which is actually a beautiful name, and you won't forget it. It just gets a hold of you, won't let go. I mean, you might succeed in pulling one of its little arms off of you, but then there's like 7 other little arms that just grab you, it just hugs you, won't let go. Little tentacles just stick right to you. Matthew Calamari Sr. started as a Donald Trump bodyguard. He eventually was named Trump Organization's COO, Chief Operating Officer. He's the one who's been reported to be under additional scrutiny by prosecutors, just like Allen Weisselberg was as an individual. Mr. Calamari's son, Matthew Calamari Jr., started at the Trump Organization right out of high school. He's now listed as the corporate security director at the Trump Org. It is Mr. Squids the Younger who was subpoenaed to give testimony to this special grand jury last week. Grand jury testimony is secret. We can never know exactly what happens behind those closed doors. But as a general matter in New York, getting a subpoena to testify before the grand jury means you don't have a choice. You must appear. You are compelled to testify. But you also get a form of limited immunity for anything criminal that you cop to during that testimony, which means, again, as a general matter, if you are being subpoenaed to testify to the grand jury, yes, you have to testify, but you yourself are probably not getting indicted. They probably want your testimony to contribute to a potential indictment of someone else. Well, now Mr. Calamari Jr. has provided that testimony. The New York Times reported that Mr. Squids, Mr. Calamari, appeared in front of the grand jury late last week, on Thursday of last week. His lawyers say he was immunized and testified truthfully. Again, it is probably not a bad sign for Mr. Calamari Jr., who gave the testimony, but it's potentially a bad sign for someone else who he was asked to testify about. In addition to that Calamari appetizer, CNN reports that the top financial officer at the Trump Organization under Allen Weisselberg, a man named Jeffrey McConney, also was called to testify again before the grand jury late last week. Now, make of that what you will. Mr. McConney reportedly testified to the grand jury at least once already, just before the first round of indictments were handed down against the Trump Organization and its CFO. Now he's been brought back in to testify again. He and his lawyer both declined to comment on that second round of testimony, but he did reportedly give that testimony to the grand jury, again, end of last week. And, you know, subpoenas are neither indictments, nor are they sure signs that more indictments are coming. But they are a sure sign that the prosecutors are still at work and not done here.